Hey, welcome back, agents, to another episode of Prime Tips. Been a while. Been doing some research. So today we're going to look at distance and the kinetic challenge and how NIA figures distance. And we're going to find that it just, you're probably not surprised, but it's not correct. But we're going to look at why, the number of factors to figure out why that happens, that whenever they figure out that kinetic capsule distance, that it comes up short. It could be things from how your GPS works, GPS drift, to data problems, all sorts of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a well-known result and test that result in the field with what would be something that would be comparable to how Ingress actually figures out the distance. So what I did is I took some distances with Google Maps, and then I used a program that does mapping and distance on the phone, and verified that what was in Google Maps, that's what it came up with this app, and then tested to see if Ingress came up with that particular distance in different situations. And so it's kind of a black box approach. I really don't know what's going on inside the box, what's going on in the app itself, but I can tell what inputs come in and what outputs you get, and get an idea of what's happening in the middle. So just to give you the short side of it, because I'm going to go into a lot of detail on how I came up with what I came up with. And again, these are my experiences. It may not be perfect. You might have different results, but this is kind of what I came up with, and hopefully you can use this information to make your distance for your kinetic caps count for more. So my results, basically, if you straight line walking test, in other words, you start your scanner, you walk. Prime seems to have anywhere from a 10% to a 20% error rate. That means if you walk 2 kilometers, that Prime scanner's going to only record 1.6 to 1.8 kilometers. I never got a 100% result. The best I got was 10% off. So, looking at the study itself, the methodology I used, there's a lot I went into here. Test location was determined as a known distance, I said, with 3 different methods. Google Maps, I ran it with an odometer in my car, and then I used a GPS tracking app on the same phone that Ingress Prime is running on, and they all came up with the same measurements. So if I had something different, it was going to be something that was part of Ingress itself. The GPS tracking app ran on the same time as Prime ran, and when I ran these tests, Prime was in the foreground. It was the only thing that was running. Every now and then I would kick over to the GPS app just to see where we were at, but then I would come back. All in the same environment. I did this on a phone that was an Android, and it was updated. So I used those local distances. I was walking on foot in all cases except one, which we'll talk about. Most of them were in good cell data and good GPS reception, which except for some of the ones that we'll talk about. Those walks were uninterrupted. It didn't stop with anything. Here it tells you that I was using an Android phone, a Galaxy 8, Android version 9. The tests were run using only the data program that I have on that phone was Verizon, with an exception that we'll talk about. And less noted, there was no intentional interaction with the portal network. So was just looking at the distance, but if I did interact, I'll let you know that. So I wasn't charging, hacking, deploying, or anything like that on most of these tests. Since the scanner, I kept the scanner at 100% XM charge all the time. That way, they wouldn't have interaction with the portals to pull in XM as I was walking along, just to keep it kind of no interaction. So other than checking the screen for the results, most of the time when I was walking these distance tests, I had the phone upside down in my pocket, head side down, which puts it into battery saver mode, which is our first episode of Prime Tips. You know, if you've never seen that, take your phone, flip it upside down, and you'll see that it goes into battery saver mode, And so it's still running, but it's not running the screen, things like that. I did do 2-minute waits on some of them because, as we find out, about 2 minutes is what it seems that there was a pause between what happened and what was reported. So I would give it 2 minutes to kind of catch up and go on. So that's kind of how I went about it. So one of the tests that I did was, I'll call it the 4 half-K walks. So 4 times I took a 5.5 kilometer straight line walk down a sidewalk. When I got to the end, I waited 2 minutes, checked things, turned around, and walked back. Now, the reason I did that stop and check was, if I doubled back real quickly, there's a possibility that it might not catch that change in direction and short me those distances. So, leg 1, I walked half a kilometer. The end of the leg, Ingress showed 0.3 kilometers traveled, so it was off a little bit. After 2 minutes, it stayed at 0.3 kilometers. Did the next leg, so I walked another 5 half-K, total 1K. The end of that leg, the total was 0.6 kilometers traveled. The weight there showed up. So after a 2-minute wait, it bumped up to 0.8 kilometers. So I got a 20% there. Leg 3, another half kilometer. Total is 1.5 kilometers. The end of that leg, Ingress showed 1.2 kilometers traveled. So it was losing. And I waited for the 2 minutes. 1.2 is all it gave me. So when on the last leg, another half kilometer. Total walk there is 2 kilometers. Into that leg, it showed me a total of 1.5 kilometers traveled. I gave it a 2-minute pause, and it got a little bit more. It went to 1.6 kilometers. So in that case, my total walk distance was 2 kilometers. Prime only showed me walking 1.6 kilometers. So there's an error rate of 20%. It got 80% of the distance traveled. I think some of that is because you double back. You lose a little bit of distance there. It just doesn't seem to be as good as those long walks. So my next one was, I took 2 1-kilometer straight line walks. Basically, it was 1 kilometer down, 1 kilometer back, with a 2-minute pause at the end and a 2-minute pause at the turnaround. And I started the kinetic cap at 0, and the end result is I got to 1.8 kilometers. So leg 1, walked a little bit more than 1 kilometer. The end of the leg, Ingress showed 0.7 kilometers traveled. 2-minute pause, stayed at 0.7 kilometers. Went on leg 2, get to my 2-kilometer walk. Into that leg, Ingress showed 1.4. So I waited 3 minutes for this one, and it got up to 1.8 kilometers. So the end result there is total walk 2 kilometers, 1.8. So error rate of 10% or so. So it recorded 90% of the distance traveled. That's about the best that I got. Study 5, there was a lot of discussion about how actually does Ingress figure out distance. Is it taking readings and taking GPS readings and then sending those readings up to the NIA servers, and the NIA servers are doing the math to figure out how long it is and then reporting it back as data? Or it might be taking readings as it goes and doing the math and saying, hey, I walked so much distance. There's a little bit of a difference there. But the one thing that was sure was that it was not a true stream of distance. If you saw that pause, you could see that it would go up. Now, that really wasn't because of GPS drift. And if you're unfamiliar with GPS drift, if you get into a place where you have poor GPS service and you watch your map, you'll see your avatar move around when you're not moving. And basically what's happening there is the way that GPS gets its position is that it's sending a signal up to a satellite, and the satellite then is sending it back, and it's doing a timing to figure out how long it is, and it knows the distance from you to that satellite, which doesn't do enough to tell you where you're at. What you need is three or so many of those satellites. Then it can triangulate that position and figure out where you're at. Again, we're dealing with consumer grade GPS, so really you still have somewhere between 20 and probably 20 and 40 meters of accuracy. So it's not going to get down to the inch. They can do that, but probably not with a phone. So depending upon where you're at, those distances could be off and jumping around. But also with the circle test, since it's not giving that information continuously, some of the discussion was if you're going in a circle and it gets it when you're halfway across the circle, and then the other half you've gone all the way around, but it's only doing the distance across the middle. So we wanted to test that out. I kind of had, much like a track that you would use to run, went around a park. So 4 laps around the perimeter of a park with a whole lot of portals in it. Each lap was about 482 meters, so I had to walk an extra 128 meters at the end to get it to 2 kilometers. Again, no direct interaction with the portals, no hacking, no charging, no deploying. Since the scanner is 100% charged, there was no XM being picked up. If there was, it would have been negligible. These laps were done without any pausing between the laps, so there's no 2-minute pause here except at the very end. The result there, well, again, I walked a little over 2 kilometers, 2.01 kilometers. Prime recorded 1.8 kilometers. So again, error rate of 10%, recorded 90% of the distance traveled. I was surprised at this. I thought that I would have a higher error rate. I thought that it would have to measure across or on the corners or something like that. But that was probably one of the better results that I got. Again, it was constant movement. I wasn't waiting on anything. Another one that I looked at, because I hear people talk about it, is the driving test. Now, you have 2 different speeds that you have to worry about when you're talking about Ingress. You have speed lock, which would be the speed at which, when you're moving, you can't do anything. So you can't interact with portals, you can't charge, you can't do a lot of things. Then I guess what you would call walk lock, the speed at which, if you're going too fast, it's not going to count it as distance traveled. So a little bit of research gave me an idea that what that speed was. So I took my car, driving on a rural road, nobody around on this road. It was a nice straight line. GPS reception in the area was good. The data reception in the area was pretty good, as good as it gets in this area. The phone was in a cradle on the front dash, so it wasn't like it was hidden away in a pocket or underneath a seat or something. It was getting good signal. I kept the speed of the car between 8 kilometers per hour, about 5 miles per hour, and 10 kilometers per hour, about 6.25. I was probably more near the 10 kilometer per hour edge. The movement was constant, uninterrupted. Like I said, didn't have to wait on anybody going across the road or anything. And there were no portals along this route. So there was no portal interaction or anything. This was the worst that I got. So the total distance I went was 2.03 kilometers. The total distance reported by Ingress was 1.2 kilometers. So Prime had an error rate of 59%. It only recorded 41% of the distance traveled. Now, there might be people out there that do the driving trick and get better results. Less than half. And it's really hard to go that slow, and it eats up a lot of time. I just would rather walk it, or if you're biking, something like that. Now, I know people that bike race, they complain that speed's a little slow for them to ride their bike, and I kind of get that. Another one that I did, and these are probably more important, is cell and GPS results. So we have a place where the cell data, the cell reception is pretty poor. The GPS is pretty good, again, depending upon where you're at in this particular nature preserve. So I took a continuous walk on the trail with lots of portals along the route. And this one I did a lot of interaction. I was actually finishing up some microfielding. So I was interacting with the portals a lot during this particular test. The first half of the walk was in that open area. There wasn't under any trees or anything. The data reception was pretty good. It was fair. The GPS reception was good. GPS reported that I traveled a little over 1 kilometer. Ingress reported half kilometer. Second half of the walk was in woods. I was under a canopy. There, the data reception went down to poor. Sometimes it might have dropped off to nothing for a short while. And GPS reception was fair under that cover. So in that result, again, I think the data reception is the thing that really changed the difference. My error rate was 27%. It recorded about 73% of the distance traveled. So as the data connection gets worse, the amount of distance that Ingress is reporting seems to get worse. So it seems like it may be not really streaming, but doing more along the lines of packet reporting. So it'll get a GPS location and send that off. And then if it can't get one in 2 minutes, it skips it, or it doesn't seem like it's buffering it, that it's hold on to it. And then it might have another one that it sends a little later, and you might have backtracked in that time, or it's not getting information correctly, and it's erring on the side of being low instead of the side of being high. So on my last test, I picked a place where there was really bad cell service, and the GPS was pretty poor. It was still there. I never got you've lost GPS, but I know that it was pretty poor. So it was a continuous walk on a trail. Some of portals along the route, I had some limited interaction with those portals. Since the data service wasn't available a great amount of the time, some of them I couldn't even really act with. I couldn't interact with them because my Verizon cell service didn't work under that canopy in that area. I was between towers, not in an area that a lot of people are at, so they don't have a real good service for Verizon there. It actually was so bad that I really couldn't interact with things, and I got an error that I'll tell you about. So I went with the second pass. I went and picked up a Wi-Fi hotspot, which is with a different carrier, Sprint this time. And the interaction with the portals was much better. So it was a combination of things, being under the canopy, but also being in a place where this particular cell provider just doesn't provide very well. So the results, this is actually the worst that I got. I walked a total of 4.5 kilometers as reported by the GPS. Now again, that GPS is an app that's running on my phone at the same time Ingress is running. So that was pure GPS distance that it's recording. Ingress, on the other hand, pointed a measly 0.3 kilometers distance. So it really, really looks like the data, if the data's not there, it's not going to get your distance correct. Ingress had an error rate of 93% and only recorded 7% of the distance traveled. So what this comes down to is if you are walking and getting kinetic capsules and you're trying to get them to generate, you've got to have good data service. Of course, you have to have GPS. But in most cases, I find that if you have good data service, you're going to have good GPS. But, you might be a little bit different than me. So one of the things that I found out was that if that data is so poor, you can time out. So on the left side of this picture, you'll see that there's a portal, and you can see that there's a mark. There's a resonator that I deployed, and it sat there and it sit and span. So it's just burning and burning and burning. And it did not ever deploy. And I quickly saw the error, which I saw the error again a second time. And I thought, okay, I've got this data error. I wonder if it will correct itself. And on the other picture on here, I walked, that probably was a good 0.5 kilometer away from that particular portal. Still could see on my map that resonator was trying to deploy. It was still going through the animation, but it never did deploy. And I had walked out into an area where I know there's good cell service and I know there's good GPS service. but it didn't pick up. So when I came back, it just didn't do it. So the only way that I could get out of that is to restart the Ingress app itself. It couldn't deploy anything because that deploy was still running. So when I tried it another time, I caught the error and I get a no retries error. And that happens after 2 minutes. So if you try to deploy something and it doesn't work, you get 2 minutes. So how does that happen? Well, if you're in an area where you've got decent cell service and you walk under a canopy, or if you're in a larger city, you walk under a building, or you walk downtown and you get under a lot of buildings, you could lose that cell service. And if you've lost that cell service for 2 minutes, it seems like, it gives up. And it may not try again. So the only thing that you can do at that point is to take Prime down completely, restart it completely, and see whether it will come on. If it won't come on, you don't have data, you're not playing. You're not going to be able to do anything. You may have to go somewhere else. Now, you may be asking, well, how the heck does somebody get a portal in an area where you don't have cell data? Well, it could be that I don't have cell data for me. It also seems like, and this is just me being paranoid, it seems like cell data service is getting poorer and poorer in the area that I live in. I think that they may be backing off the 4G, 4 LTE service to bring in the 5G service, but that's just me being paranoid. But how do you fix it, or how does that work? Well, there's the answer sitting on my knee, and that is a Wi-Fi. If you got a Wi-Fi unit that's a hotspot that uses a different provider, that service may be available there. And that's what happened in this particular case. When I broke out my hotspot that uses Sprint instead of Verizon, I was able to interact with that portal. I was able to, put on resonators. Everything worked fine. So that's probably one of the best things you can do, is you can team that up and get the best of both worlds. So some of the conclusions that I come with, probably the biggest thing is, if you don't have data, you don't have anything. For the best results, if you're looking at distance and those kinetic capsules, Prime seems to get the distances from the GPS location, but we're not sure. Again, it's a black box. If it reports those locations to NIA and lets the servers do the math and sends it back, or whether it's doing the calculations and then it's sending it to NIA, who's giving more distance on the kinetic capsule and sending it back. But either way, there's a transfer of data that's going on using that data system. And if you don't have data, it's not going to report it. And it does not seem to stack it. That might be something that you kind of can may be familiar with. You know that if you're in certain areas and you have low cell service, that if you hit a burster a couple of times, it may sit and spin and then they'll go off all at the same time. What's happening there is that you've given it an instruction and it's trying to get that instruction out to the NIA servers. It's not making that data connection, or it's not making a good enough connection. And once it does, everything goes. That doesn't seem to be the case with GPS and distance traveled. It seems that it drops those packets along the way. So if you don't have that really good data cell service or Wi-Fi service, you're going to lose distance where you walk. So you got to stay in an area that has cell service for the best response and reporting. The worse the cell service, the greater that error is going to be. If Prime doesn't seem to be responding, you're probably not getting anything. So one of the things that you probably want to do is every now and then interact with a portal to make sure that data is still working. It doesn't seem that interacting with the portal, whether that's charging or deploying or whatever, it doesn't seem like that forces the data packet to go. It seems like the data packet is scheduled on its own. But interacting with that portal does let you know that your data is still good and that it's going to do it in a reliable fashion. Try to do long, straight, uninterrupted walks or whatever it is that you're doing. It seems the lower percentage is whenever you have that uninterrupted movement. You can do what's called soaking the sats if you have a GPS that doesn't seem to be reliable. And what that is if you're in a situation or a place where your GPS doesn't seem to be reliable, you probably want to sit in one spot for a couple of minutes before you start. What that does is it lets the phone or the GPS in the phone make connection to as many GPS satellites as it possibly can. The more satellites that it can make a connection to, the greater the reliability and the ability for it to tell you how far that you've moved. So the more satellites is a good thing. I don't know if moving fast would cause an issue with it losing, but again, they seem to have the walking limit. So even moving fast, it's not going to be a deal, because once you get over like 10 kilometers per hour, it's not going to record that movement, which I never really did try that out. Backtracking, you probably want to avoid backtracking as much as possible. So, walking short distances back and forth, if you happen to turn around and walk back within that 2-minute time frame or the time frame that it's doing the reporting, you may lose some of that distance because it's going to report you closer than where you were instead of the point that you went and came back. Avoid areas with dense canopies or obstructions like tall buildings and that kind of stuff. Again, if you're looking for distance, that's probably the best way to go about it. If you're looking to make a data hardened portal, look for those spots. Look for that spot where you have to have a carrier that most people in the area don't have, or a spot where there's a heavy canopy and the only time that you can really get to that portal is in the wintertime when there's no leaves and the canopy's clear. And so you get in and you deploy it and keep it deployed and get some keys, and then you use that in the summertime when nobody can get to it. Again, watch your interaction with your portals. If you're seeing a lag between the time that maybe you put a resonator on and it actually goes on, that can be a clue that your cell data is not running as fast as it possibly can, and you could be losing distance. Especially that 2 minutes, or if you see the retry errors, no retries error on your phone, then you might as well just shut down Prime completely and then restart it and see if you're getting connected, because you're not going to be getting any distance after that. And monitor the distance that Prime reports. And this is kind of a hard one because you have that lag after it picks up that information. So keep looking at your capsule, especially when you get close to the end. So when you get close to the end and you're at 1.6 or 1.8 kilometers, it might be worth taking a minute or two, maybe 3, and waiting, and then checking to see if it picks up the slack that you have. So because that could be 0.2 kilometers that you don't have to redo, because if you keep walking till you get 2 and there's 0.2 kilometers on top of that, when you restart the new cap, it may not count that 0.2. So take those breaks near the end, and that may do it. So that's my theories on distance and kinetic caps and how Ingress figures it all out. I could be totally wrong. I could be totally right. Again, it's a black box experience. I'm just going on what I see. The only thing that I can tell you with 100% certainty is it does not seem like Ingress is ever going to get 100% of the distance you walked as the distance in that KCAP. maybe somebody's got the 100%, but I'm thinking you're going to have to be in a perfect cell with perfect GPS and perfect cell data and perfect timing. And I don't think it's just going to be perfect. But speaking of perfect, I hope I'll see you on a perfect day out in the field sometime. See you later, agents.